I am Caribbean British.
White Caucasian.
I would say white British.
Barbadian.
Caucasian white. I was 5 when the war ended. It was nice in Brighton because of the seaside. You couldn't go on the beach because it was covered in barbed wire because of the unexploded bombs that they thought might be there. So we didn't go on the beach probably till I was 8 or 9. I had a nanny that looked after me. She died when I was about 8. They never said that she was leaving or anything. I mean, it had been like my mother. I didn't know my mother, really, because up to 5, the age of 5, 1945, she was in London sort of working. And then she was around more after the war ended. But Nanny stayed. She was really, really nice. And then one day, Mum said Nanny was going home to visit her family, and she just never came back. And she said to me, "Oh, Nanny's died, and I'll be looking after you from now on." And that was a very vivid memory. The way she said it was like, "I don't want to, but I will be. I'll be looking after you from now on."
We didn't move to Brighton until I was 12. It was a good place to grow up, really, because you had the sea. By that time, the beaches were available, and I had a tennis club I belonged to.
You all got a different name for it, but Richard, you're not busy, are you? Just a quick question. You know when y'all was growing up and you had these little kind of iron-shaped things where you throw up in the air, you throw up in the air, you pick up the other. What do you call it? Jacks. Well, it's similar to jacks. But we did it with little pebbles, because we didn't have jacks at that time.
I never felt threatened, I have to say. I probably grew up in quite a safe environment, but looking back, it probably would have been better to be a little more multicultural and with a more open view. It was quite a privileged childhood where I didn't really know much about what else was going on. It being the 80s, there were areas of society that were not so easy to live in, but my childhood and what I experienced was really pretty easy.
It was an interesting experience. I grew at a time when there was a lot of adversity to people of colour being here, so it was first generation born here or second generation Afro-Caribbean. So I grew in a time where the National Front was a really strong party, which resulted in a lot of hatred towards black people in general, but that manifested in schools and in the way that people generally would perceive you or deal with you on the streets. The older white generation would look at you as a little black thief, and you could very easily see that that's the way that they were looking at you and dealing with you. It was something you felt as opposed to something that you saw. But you were also walking around people that were skinheads and were very openly racist. So you would walk past the street and literally people would spit at you or call you a black so-and-so at will. It was very difficult, but it armed you for latter life because you were aware of how people could be.
In the West Indies as a whole, the elders are very strict with the youngsters. You've got to be respectful, you know. You couldn't stand in front of your grandmother or, sing and swear or anything like that, because they'll beat you. You get a couple of slaps,
I don't remember anything really about any sort of religious practice or even discussion of religion. I think the thing which made it Jewish was that one cared whether people were Jewish or not. And most of the friends my parents had, they were Jewish. There were Jewish people who lived in the road, were friendly with them, weren't particularly friendly with anybody else in the road. So, I have the question now, is why was the family particularly friendly with other Jewish families when we didn't practice Judaism at all? And I think that is an interesting question because, it raises the whole query really of what makes you feel Jewish. It was secular and yet it was distinctively Jewish.
They weren't religious at all, my parents. In fact, I would say the dominating idea my father had was to assimilate into society because of the terrible things that had happened to the Jews in the war. He didn't want to advertise the fact that we were Jewish. He played bridge a lot at a club, and because it was Brighton, there were a lot of Jewish people, but I think most of his friends weren't Jewish. But nevertheless, in the family, there was a sort of separation in their minds about people who were Jewish and who weren't. There's no doubt about it. They still thought like Jews, but they didn't practice in any way being Jews. Except my grandma, who used to go to synagogue on the sort of important days and fasted once a year on Passover. And they used to make a terrible business about the fasting, which is ridiculous, really. All it meant was missing 2 meals. You think it was the end of the world, and then they have a big feast afterwards with cold fried fish and chicken soup.
The areas of growing up that are sort of common to there being a Jewish household is meal times and food. Food played a massive part of our lives. So, Mum was always into cooking and nurturing and that sort of classic Jewish mother. Have another piece of cake, have another biscuit. In fact, my friends as kids, when they came around, they would say, "Oh, I love coming to your mum's," because you'd walk in the door from school and she'd say, "Right, what can I get you, darling? Can I get you hot chocolate?" People say that Jewish families, when they eat, they all talk at once. And I think that's probably true. Nobody listens to each other. Everybody talks over each other. Being Jewish wasn't an aspect that came into things, except when Mum and Dad would occasionally say something in Yiddish, like a word. They don't speak Yiddish, but they'd say some funny word from their childhood. I don't think I even knew I was Jewish till I was a teenager.
My mother became a Christian, as in devout Christian, around the age of 45. So up until then, we'd lived in a fairly, a very structured environment, but not with the kind of biblical presence that manifested as we got older. And actually, again, that was enlightening because you saw someone change so much, as in my mother. You saw her take on a belief, and that belief really started to empower her. So it was enlightening and valuable to see the power of what belief manifested in someone.
It was very comfortable, but with hindsight, I think it's a bit of a blinkered view of what life is like. If you stay in nice middle-class areas, you go to school in a nice middle-class area, or your friends are from nice middle-class areas, you don't really see what the world's like. But maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe if you have the ability to shelter your children from that, maybe there's no rush for them to see that the world is not as comfortable and easy as it is in middle-class areas.
Because your neighbours were working class as well, we were able to mix cultures and go out and play as groups up until late hours in the night, which was fantastic. We had a lot more freedom than children have now. At the same token, money was thin on the ground. So you look back and realise how thin it was at the time as a child, but you didn't feel that you were suffering in the circumstance that you were in. It was difficult, but not necessarily a difficulty that you saw whilst you were growing.
I think the strongest memory, the most significant memory, I would say in a way, which stands out from certainly a time when I was living in Brighton, was about the age of 11, looking in the mirror. In those days we had wash basins in our bedrooms, and my bedroom had a wash basin in the corner, I remember very clearly, and a mirror over it. And I remember looking in the mirror one day with no apparent reason, not really to sort of particularly, but a very real question arose as to who is that? Who am I? Because what I seemed to be looking at was a stranger. What I seemed to be looking at was not how I felt. And that stands out as quite a memory from childhood.